Good morning and welcome to First Edition, the online ministry of First Community Church. My name is Reverend John Gerard and I'm the Minister of Mission and Justice here at First Community. We are thrilled to have you join us for worship today. Know that no matter where you are on life's journey, where you've come from or what you have or haven't done, know that you are welcome and accepted here at First Community. Today's sermon, titled Vulnerability is Not a Weakness, comes to us from the Reverend Dr. Glenn Miles, senior minister here at First Community, and it's based on the Gospel of Mark in chapter 6. It promises to hold a very special message for you, so be sure to listen for God's voice, speaking to you, with you, and for you. May you be blessed in your time this morning. Let us worship.
Show me your face, fill up this space. My world needs you right now. My world needs you right now. I can't escape being afraid. Fill me with you right now. My world needs you right now.
Show me your face. Fill up this space. My world needs you right now. My world needs you right now. I can't escape being afraid. Fill me with you right now. My world needs you right now.
Powerful down, bring with it a sound that points us to you right now. Erase substitutes right now. Fix what I see, and God, please fix me. My world needs with you right now. Let us see you right now. Powerful down, bring with it a sound that points us to you right now. Erase substitutes right now. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus.
Jesus,
The sweetest name on earth.
Jesus,
Nobody like you, Jesus.
Jesus,
Oh,
Jesus,
great I am.
Jesus,
The Lord of Lords, the King of Kings.
Jesus,
I praise your name, Jesus.
Jesus. My world needs you right now. My world needs you right now.
Vulnerability is not a weakness. My best friends in life are ones who've been willing to be vulnerable with me, with other friends, with the people they've served. I'm thinking this morning especially of my best friend, my wife, Julie. We've been married for 45 years. I'm instructed by her to tell you that it was an arranged marriage when we were 8 years old. But in those 45 years, she's learned to be vulnerable with me and has helped me to discover a vulnerable side as well. And it's in that vulnerability where our relationship has grown and strengthened, because it's not a weakness. I'm thinking this morning as well of one of my best friends. He's my first boss right out of college. His name is Doug Dornhecker. Doug was the senior pastor of the First Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Hanford, California. I was his youth director. On the very first day that I worked for him, he shared with me that he's diabetic. And there are certain things that happen sometimes when his insulin is too high or it's too low, and wanted me to be sure to know how to react and how I could help him. It was a very vulnerable thing to do on that first day. We became close friends and remain to even now. Very, very close friends, one of my best friends. I'm thinking of Dick Wing. Many of you remember Dick, our longtime senior minister here, my predecessor. He was here for 23 years. I've been friends with Dick for over 40 years. I worked for him for 7 years as an associate minister in the church that Dick was leading. Those were 7 of the best years I've ever experienced in ministry. And I got to witness and see Dick be vulnerable, open, to share with me, sometimes with the congregation, from his heart. This last weekend, Julie and I traveled to Kansas City to spend a few days with our boys, especially. The first night there with Nate and Stephen, and Nate's girlfriend Amber, was marvelous. We went to an Italian place called Lydia's. It was great food, great fun, long conversations. We were there about 3.5 hours. Maybe you've had a dinner like that with family. It was really wonderful. Somebody else cooked and somebody else cleaned, so it was even better. The next night, we went to a birthday party, a 60th birthday party, for my friend Adam Hamilton. Adam, I've talked about before. He's the pastor of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in the Kansas City area. There's 5 or 6 campuses there in Kansas City. Well, the party was held at a winery in Kansas. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it was actually very good wine. It really was. The vineyard owner there is amazing. Tremendous wine. There was a live band and about 100 friends and family and co-workers of Adam's who were invited to be there. There was also a roast. There were 3 folks who were invited to roast Adam, to tease him and make fun of him in a fun kind of way. I was one of those roasters. I went last. Had a marvelous time, giving my friend such a bad time. But I had to introduce myself because not everybody in the room knew who I was. Some of them did from my time in Kansas City. But nonetheless, I said to everybody, my name is Glenn Miles. I'm currently the senior minister at First Community Church in Columbus, Ohio, an amazing congregation with ministries that stretch around the world. I'm in my 8th year there now. And then I said, prior to that, for 14 years, I served as the pastor of Country Club Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, in Kansas City, Missouri, just up the road a little bit from this winery here. Now, you need to know, let me pause here, that the metropolitan area of Kansas City is about the same size as Columbus, but it's divided right down the middle by the border between Missouri on the east and Kansas on the west. The church I served was in Kansas City, Missouri. Julie and I lived on the Kansas side of the border. Because of that, then I told the crowd, because of that, I did some research about the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Kansas. I looked at their bylaws, and I found a bylaw, I told the crowd, from 1872 that was still on the books. And I said, I'm in danger being here. My career is in jeopardy. I shouldn't even be walking around here right now. Here's what that bylaw says. Any minister with good standing in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Kansas will refrain from drinking, smoking, dancing, playing cards, and fraternizing with Methodists. Oh, sorry, John. Sorry. John's got 2 weeks to get me back. I'm going to be out of town for a couple of weeks. I'm in trouble just talking to John. Every time my ordination is in trouble. It was great fun. It was a great party. But here's what I really love the most about Adam. It's when he gets vulnerable. When he's no longer the pastor of a 25,000 member church and the author of 30 books or however many he's written. What's beautiful to see is when he's able to be vulnerable. Sometimes in front of his congregation, he changed his view on a very serious theological issue that I know cost him hundreds, if not thousands of members and dollars in the plate. He shared this information in a vulnerable way. He called me once about 15 years ago, and he said, Glenn, my wife LaVon and I, we're looking for 3 couples, 3 pastors and their spouses that we could form a small group with. We'd love to meet once a month. Not with church members. I love my church, he said, but not with church members, not with staff, but with people who understand what it's like to be a pastor, for people who can form a safe space for us. Of course, we said yes, and it became a marvelous place for all of us to be safe with each other, to be vulnerable when necessary. Vulnerability is not a weakness. In the text, especially the first paragraph that John read for us today, we see Jesus behaving with vulnerability at the center of who he is. Now, you kind of have to read between the lines, but it's there. Oftentimes in Mark, these transitional paragraphs, which is what John read, it's setting us up for the feeding of the 5,000. Sometimes in Mark, though, you got to stay in that paragraph, not skip ahead too quickly to the story that's about to come, because something's being revealed there. Consider, for example, Mark chapter 11. It's the story of Palm Sunday. You know, the day that Jesus enters in that triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And the people are waving palm branches and shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. It's a big and beautiful and exciting day. And then Jesus makes his way into Jerusalem and decides to retire for the night, as Mark says, for it was already late. It's a transitional paragraph, but don't rush too quickly. Mark is letting us know the days ahead are difficult for Jesus. It's already late. There's a cross waiting at the end. It's already late. In the text that John read this morning from Mark chapter 6, we see Jesus looking at his disciples. They're called apostles at the beginning of the paragraph. It's a Greek word, apostello. It means I send. Jesus had sent them out as apostles, as disciples, to preach and teach the universal love and grace of God given to everyone. They've gone out and preached to hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people. But now Jesus can see, as they've returned, they're worn out. They're tired. It's that vulnerable place within Jesus that allows him to see that his co-workers are in need of rest, in need of a retreat, in need of respite, to take a deep breath. They're exhilarated by their experiences, but exhausted, excited, but overwhelmed. They've been accepted in many places, but rejected in many others. It's time to take a deep breath and allow God's Spirit to renew them. Now, ironically, as the rest of the paragraph goes on, that escapes them, and there are people and crowds that gather around them. We'll say more about that in a little bit. But in that moment, Jesus recognizes their need for rest. Why is he feeling so vulnerable? What is it? Well, you've heard a couple of sermons in the last 2 weeks, a couple of great sermons in the last 2 weeks by John last week and Seth Stearns the week before. In Seth's sermon, he noted, his title was, Who Do You Think You Are? You see, Jesus has been rejected in his hometown of Nazareth. Jesus has become this brilliant prophet, this amazing preacher, this insightful and wise teacher. He's preaching not to hundreds, but to thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people. And when he returns home for a moment of rest, perhaps, to connect with family, what does he hear? Snide remarks, put down comments. You're Joseph and Mary's boy, right? Isn't there a sketchy story about your birth? We know who you are. Just get in line, boy. They talk just like that to him. I can hear them saying it. Get in line, boy. We like the status quo. Don't come in here and ruffle things up for us. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever been rejected by someone you loved? Have you ever given your heart away in hope only to see it broken and ripped and torn? Have you trusted a colleague, a friend, become vulnerable with that one, only to see them use that against you? I'm fairly certain if we took the time to survey the room, every one of us, from the youngest to the oldest, would have had at least one experience of rejection, of put down, of hurt. I know a pastor who developed a very close friendship with a man in his congregation. The pastor, in fact, became vulnerable with this man, shared from his heart his hopes and his dreams and his ideas for the congregation. He also shared some of his concerns and his weaknesses, some of the failures, things he could have done better. And yet this friend was so encouraging and so helpful. Their friendship was only deepened by the pastor becoming vulnerable with them until the friend turned on him. The friend turned on the pastor when the church began to practice what they were preaching. They were preaching the full welcome of all of God's children, including the LGBTQ community, the full welcome of everyone and anyone, regardless of who they are, where they're from, what they believe or don't believe. They weren't just welcomed, they were accepted. There wasn't a bait and switch that said, oh, we welcome everybody, now change your behavior and stop living like that. No. They welcomed everyone fully and accepted them as they are. And the pastor's friend was angry. He was furious. Those people, he said, these are his words, need to just be quiet. And he used his knowledge of the pastor's vulnerabilities to attack him, to call his integrity into question, to go after him. Oh, the voices in that congregation were minimal. It was a small, tiny minority. Tiny, not even a percent, but loud, angry voices they were, especially this one, the former friend. The pastor's heart was crushed. His soul was just ruined. He'd given himself to his friend. For Jesus, this place of vulnerability may be even worse than that. You see, just a few paragraphs before the one we read today, Mark tells the story of the murder, of the execution of John the Baptist. You remember John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, Jesus' mentor and spiritual teacher. John the Baptist is the one who baptizes Jesus in the Jordan River. John the Baptist predicts that Jesus will become a prophet greater than he is, greater than any that have ever lived. And indeed, Jesus does become that one. But still, this is his friend. This is his family member, his cousin, his mentor. And he's been brutally taken down. Why? Because King Herod, he was a puppet king under Rome's rule, but still he had a great deal of power. King Herod has bought the lie that he must keep power at all costs. King Herod has bought the lie that no matter how immoral he behaves or anything else that's going on within his regime, he doesn't care. He must keep that power to himself. And it is John the Baptist who preaches against that politician. It is John the Baptist who calls him out for his lies. It is John the Baptist who calls him out for his immoral behavior. It is John the Baptist who courageously says, this far and no further, it must end here, because this King Herod was lining his own pockets while ignoring the disinherited and the marginalized, letting them starve if need be, as long as he could keep his pockets lined and his power in place. He'd bought the lie that power was what mattered more than anything else. The great African-American pastor and philosopher Howard Thurman wrote a book in 1949 titled Jesus and the Disinherited. He speaks to this. Let's put his words up on the screen. The penalty of deception, sit with this for a moment. The penalty of deception is to become a deception, with all sense of moral discrimination vitiated. A man who lies habitually becomes a lie. And it is increasingly impossible for him to know why he is lying and when he is lying and when he is not. You may know that Martin Luther King Jr. was inspired by this book to take on the cause of equality, to put down racism in this land. Herod's bought the lie. Jesus surely is feeling vulnerable, maybe even overwhelmed by what's happened to his cousin. He might see in the death of John the Baptist a foreshadowing of Mark 11, because it was already late. It may already be for Jesus that he is already there. It's from that vulnerable place that he looks beyond his disciples and he sees the crowd that has gathered. And he looks on them with compassion. In the Greek, the word for compassion is related to your guts. He feels it in his guts. He feels it in his soul. He feels it in his heart and his mind. He knows, Mark says, that they are sheep without a shepherd. Their bodies are hungry. He'll feed them in just a matter of hours for sure. But before that, he knows their souls are hungry. Their minds are hungry to be fed. They're like sheep without a shepherd. If you are a major Bible nerd like John and me, you might recognize that as a quote coming from the book of Ezekiel, a prophet who lived hundreds of years before Jesus. Ezekiel, like John the Baptist, preached to the politicians in Palestine. They too were lining their pockets. They too were ignoring the people on the margins, on the edge, the disinherited. Ezekiel challenged them and said to them, "Your people are like sheep without a shepherd." Mark puts those words here in the midst of his story to help us see that Jesus in this vulnerable place is able to see the people in need. Imagine some of the questions they may have. Who am I? Do I have a calling? Am I making a difference in the world? What matters most about what I do? Where am I called to? Have you heard those questions before? For me, they seem to come most often at 3 a.m. on a Monday morning. What's my call, really? Who am I, God? Where am I needed? And Jesus began to teach them many things. But we might wonder, where can we address our questions? To whom can we go with these concerns about our souls, our minds, our hearts, our calling in life? Where do we go? Well, there's a story. It comes from the beginning of time. It's not in the Bible, but it comes from the beginning of time. God brought all of creation into being with a simple word, with a simple phrase. Let it be done, according to this story. And the next thing you know, there is the universe. There is the galaxy. There is the planet Earth. And there are animals, birds and bees and fish in the sea. There are rivers and streams. And then God creates humans. God's very pleased, especially with the humans. And God puts God's spirit, God's breath, into the humans. A part of God's very self goes into them. And by that simple gift, they are then able to be in relationship with God. But as often happens in this storyteller's view, the devil comes along, and the devil's not happy. The devil is envious, as you can imagine, of this beautiful relationship that God has with God's people, with the humans, with us, as it were. And the devil decides to trick Jesus, to trick God. The devil goes up to God and says, I'd like to ask you a question. God says, fine. The devil asks the question. As God opens God's mouth to reply, the devil reaches in, grabs hold of God's tongue and binds it, locks it, so that God is no longer able to speak. This stays in place for eon after eon after eon. God's unable to have a relationship with God's people because God's tongue is bound. There's no way to bring a word, to speak a word into being. That's how God creates. That's how God creates relationships. After another eon passes, though, the devil's a little bit bored, and he decides that he wants to come back and mock God, and taunt God, make fun of God. And so while he's in the middle of making fun of God, God raises a hand and one finger. The devil pauses and says, would you like a word? God nods yes. And the devil says, one word only, no more than that. God nods yes. The devil reaches in, unbinds God's tongue, takes away the lock, and the word God says is Jesus. That's the word. That's the word that the world needs in that moment. That's the word we need in this moment. It's with Jesus that I can look in that mirror. I can look at myself, whether it's 3 a.m. or 3 p.m. or the middle of the day or the middle of the night. I can look in that mirror and ask, who am I, God? Who am I? Where's my faith? What do I believe? And with that vulnerable sense of power and ability, vulnerability then becomes not a weakness, but a strength. It becomes a place where I can grow, where you can grow, where we can find our true sense and our true self of who we are. It's with Jesus that we find the power and the courage we need. Let me be very clear as I say this word. Let me be very clear. I believe in democracy, but my faith is in Jesus. I believe in the United States of America, but my faith is in Jesus. With our faith in Jesus, we can take on the scourge of racism. With our faith in Jesus, we can take on the terrible, hate-filled lies of homophobia. With our faith in Jesus, we can challenge those who are theological terrorists who want to divide and exclude and shame. With our faith in Jesus, you and I in this church can take on anything in this world. With our faith in Jesus, there is not enough. With our faith in Jesus, we can become the ones that Jesus calls us to be. Our world is desperate for us. Our world is desperate for a voice of love, of hope, of strength and grace. We can through Jesus.
On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to